Hello everyone, Santa here with more Let's Make a Game Astral Collision. And today, I didn't do a lot in terms of stuff in this per se, and what I did focus on I think will be fairly quick to talk about, although it's more of a time-consuming task to actually do. So predominantly what I did is, if we go up into this panel, you'll notice over here, this now says Dagger Min A, Dagger Max A, Dagger Crit A, B, Damage Base. And up here, this is now switched to reading Dagger Min to Dagger Max. And this is now true for all of the weapons. They all have their own thing. Some of them have a little bit more complexity to it, like the staff has this whole thing about Earth going on right here. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what's going on and why. So I went through all of the weapons, and now all of them have this sort of thing going on. The reason for this is because I had the realization, as I was looking at things over here, that if I plug in, say, 200 to both of these, you will notice something about these damage ranges. Some of these weapons, like the axe, have an incredibly high damage range, right? It says it has an average of 653 damage, which is, of course, halfway in between these two. Where something like the sword has an average of 215. Now, not all weapons, of course, are created equal and all sorts of random stuff, but looking around, like the claws right here, if you actually had 200, you'd have that average, but this strikes twice, so this is effectively 400. This means that a lot of these damage values are all over the place. The katana is way up there. The sword is relatively low compared to some of these options, at least. I don't know exactly where I want things to end up, but things are decidedly going to get tweaked. So what all this meant is that as I was kind of thinking about this, I'm like, it will be a giant pain in the rear end if I have to go through and update all of the instances where I've calculated out the sword formula. If I want to tweak it later. If I want to tweak any one of these formulas later, and I've made a bunch of weapons at that point, it's going to be a pain in the rear end to have to go back and edit them. And so what it seems to me to be very important to do is to figure out, or I had the realization, I should say, that I could actually make it so that way it is much easier to update. And that is what's going on here. So what I can do is I can have these functions, which I have defined over here. Sword min equals this function, sword max equals this function. I just copied all the formulas over into these things. And I can modify this one right here, and every time sword min appears, it's going to be updated. And so on and so forth through all of these. So this took a while to get to everything. I'll go over some of what's going on with some of the caster weapons in a moment. But as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff here, and so I just spent a bunch of time copying stuff around and rearranging things. And the goal with all of this is to make it easier to update things later. So that way, if I want to change how much damage the sword deals, what its formula looks like, all I have to do is modify it. If I go to the top here, modify these functions. If I want to change the minimum sword damage, I can modify this one. If I want to change the maximum sword damage, I can modify this one. If I want to adjust the critical rate for the sword, I can modify this one. And it will update every single sword. Both their descriptions right here, you'll see I use those functions to find the values. I use those functions to calculate out the damages. For the steel sword, the rusty sword, the fiery dragon sword, the royal Kendron sword. So in all of these places where I have swords, I can now update them all simultaneously by changing these functions, by changing what these functions return. So I wanted to be able to do that because I thought it would make it substantially easier to balance things later on as I go through, as I play the game more, and as I figure out how things work. The axe may be getting nerfed, for example. It maybe deals too much damage. But maybe not, right? Because part of it, part of what's going to have to go into the ultimate balancing step here is that what does this look like? Well, who wields an axe, right? What do their stats end up looking like? What can they get their stats to? So we have the knight, the whammo, and the ranger here. I can see using the axe, or having axe in the list. So it's one of those things where, okay, I can see that I have these things. I want to be able to modify the formulas more easily. So it was just a whole process of going through and like cutting stuff out and copying and pasting things. So it was a bit of a tedious thing, but a time-consuming task to do, fairly straightforward to explain. So that's what I've done primarily this week, is I have focused on, I had this problem, or this impending problem, because again, if I had to go in here and say update every single one of these scimitars like I just did now, whenever I wanted to tweak how their damage worked, it would be a giant pain in the rear end to go and do that, as it was for this, and it'll probably be even worse. I'll probably have quite a few different swords, for example. Having to track down, okay, here's all my different swords, let's update all of these formulas. This will just make it a lot more streamlined going forward. Now, I did say that I would comment some on some of these more complicated formulas, particularly the elemental weapons stuff. So this is a switch. You pass in what element you want as a string. It will identify which element you're referring to and store that in our lovely variable here that will then be processed. So like right here, for example, you can see that it gets multiplied by 2. So there's a couple of different places where I do this because, of course, these draw off of different stats. The most complex one at the moment is the scimitar. You can see the magic missile right here. If you specify an incorrect value, the elemental damage will be 0. The tome has a little bit more complexity going on, but similar to the other one. Here you can see the scimitar ones have, because they have to have all of the stats, it's just like, what is the elemental damage that this deals, and then grabbing that and multiplying it by 0.75 in this case, or whatever. So that's what's going on with these. This allows me to be able to draw from different elements using that element tag. So yeah, that's what's been going on. Just setting all that stuff up. Like I said, running into the problem or realizing the problem that was going to exist as I was over here in the weapon planning tab, trying to think about, okay, what do I want to do with a mace? What do I want to do with some of these other weapons? And thinking about, what's the damage range look like for the sword? Does that seem like it's going to be a little bit low? Do I want to be able to tweak that and wanting to be able to make it easier to tweak? Then realizing that I can just slap a function in there and moving everything to functions. So that way I have kind of made my future life easier, presumably. So that's going to go ahead and wrap stuff up for me today. I don't really think I have anything else that I need to cover because that has been what I've worked on. So thank you for watching, and until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.